The shelter was a quiet, almost somber place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Max, a scruffy mixed breed dog, lay curled up in the back corner of his kennel. His fur, once a glossy shade of brown, had become matted and dull from neglect. His deep brown eyes, though full of pain, glistened as he watched the occasional visitor stroll past his cage. Yet none of them ever stopped. They never saw him. Not really. The shelter staff had long given up on him. His behavior, they said, was too unpredictable. One moment, Max would be calm, lying in the corner of his small cage, and the next, he'd be growling or barking, his body stiff with fear. For weeks, he'd been labeled unadoptable by the shelter's workers. His past, a mystery that no one could fully understand, left him with deep scars, physical and emotional. His previous owners had failed him, abandoning him when he needed them most, and now Max had come to believe that humans were nothing more than unreliable strangers who would only hurt him. The staff had grown tired of trying to reach him. They had already moved on to the other dogs, puppies and younger, friendlier dogs who would be adopted quickly. Max's time, it seemed, had run out. He wasn't young anymore, and his fear-driven behavior made him seem more like a problem than a pet. To the staff, he was just one more face in a long line of abandoned animals. They didn't see the potential inside him, the loyalty, the sweetness, the courage waiting to break free. Ellie had heard about the shelter from her best friend at school. She had always wanted a dog, but her mother had told her that they were too busy for a pet. So instead of asking for a dog, Ellie had taken up a mission of her own. She would help at the shelter, spending time with the animals that nobody else wanted. She didn't mind if the dog was older or had behavioral problems. She just wanted to help. It was Ellie's first visit to the shelter, and her heart immediately sank as she walked through the doors. The shelter was smaller than she had imagined, and the air inside felt heavy with the sadness of abandoned animals. Ellie moved from kennel to kennel, glancing at the dogs inside. Some were excited and wagged their tails at the sight of her. Others whimpered softly, their eyes pleading for attention. But when she stopped in front of Max's cage, something in her chest tightened. Max didn't stand up or bark at her like the others. Instead, he simply watched her with wide, cautious eyes, his head tilted slightly. Ellie felt an odd connection, a sense that this dog wasn't just unadoptable. He was misunderstood. There was something more to him, hidden beneath the layers of fear and mistrust. She took a deep breath, determined to find out what it was. As she stood there watching him, Ellie whispered softly, "I'll come back for you, Max. I promise." She wasn't sure why, but she knew she couldn't leave without giving this dog a chance. It would take time, she realized, but she was ready. She would help him find the love and care he deserved. And maybe, just maybe, Max wasn't as forgotten as he seemed. The next day, Ellie couldn't focus at school. Her mind kept drifting back to Max. She had to return to the shelter. She didn't know why she felt so strongly about this dog. He was just another stray, right? But there was something about the way he looked at her, something deep in those brown eyes that made her feel like he was waiting for someone to believe in him. After school, Ellie's excitement bubbled over as she hurried home. She rushed through her homework, barely glancing at the pages. Her mind was set on one thing: Max. She told her mother that she wanted to visit the shelter again, and after a bit of pleading, her mom agreed. "But Ellie, remember what the staff said. That dog has a lot of issues," her mom warned. "You need to be careful." Ellie nodded, but she wasn't scared. She had read stories of animals who were once considered unadoptable and were later given second chances. She believed Max deserved one too. She grabbed her jacket, a few dog treats from the kitchen, and headed out the door. When they arrived, Ellie's heart started to race with excitement. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a fresh scent in the air. The shelter was quieter than before, with fewer visitors on this gloomy afternoon. The workers were busy, sorting through paperwork and cleaning kennels. Ellie immediately walked over to the area where Max was kept. She paused before his kennel, taking a deep breath. Max was lying in his corner, just as he had been the day before. But this time, he didn't seem as withdrawn. He was awake and watching Ellie, his eyes flicking to her with a trace of curiosity. She smiled softly, her heart fluttering in her chest. "Hi, Max," Ellie whispered, crouching down in front of his cage. "It's me again. I brought you some treats." She shook the small bag in her hand, hoping he would react. Max tilted his head, his gaze shifting from the bag of treats to Ellie's face. There was hesitation in his movements, but something about her voice seemed to ease his tension. Slowly, he stood up, his legs stiff and uncertain. Ellie didn't move, not wanting to scare him. She reached her hand through the bars, offering him the treat, but he stayed back, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. Ellie's smile faded, but she wasn't discouraged. She sat on the ground beside his cage, her legs crossed in front of her. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to be your friend." Max sniffed the air, and after a few moments, he took a tentative step forward. He sniffed the treat Ellie had left on the ground, but didn't take it just yet. Instead, he sat down, still a few feet away, his eyes locked on her. Ellie's heart swelled with hope. This was a step forward, even if it seemed small. Ellie sat quietly, not expecting an immediate response. She just wanted Max to know she was there, that she wasn't like the others who had abandoned him. After a few minutes, she stood up, looking at the shelter worker nearby. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said with a smile, even though she wasn't sure if Max would remember her. As she turned to leave, she looked back at Max one last time. He was still sitting there, his eyes following her, as if he were waiting. Ellie smiled again, this time with more confidence. She had made the first step toward winning Max's trust, and she was determined not to stop now. The next few days felt like an eternity to Ellie. Every morning, she would wake up early, eager to go to school, so the day could pass quickly. The moment the school bell rang, signaling the end of her classes, Ellie's heart would race as she packed her bag and rushed home. Her thoughts were consumed with one thing, Max. On her third visit to the shelter, Ellie arrived, carrying a small squeaky toy she had bought just for him. She had read that dogs, especially those with trauma, often respond to toys as a way to feel more secure and comfortable. Ellie felt a deep sense of responsibility for him, as though she were the one who could finally change his life. When she walked into the shelter, she noticed a few other dogs barking excitedly at the new arrivals, but her focus was entirely on Max. He was still in his corner, lying motionless, his eyes half closed as he watched her approach. Ellie's stomach fluttered with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had seen some improvement in Max's reaction since their last meeting, but she didn't know how he would respond today. Ellie gently placed the squeaky toy in front of Max's cage, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat down again, this time a little closer, trying not to make any sudden moves. Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes glancing at the toy before returning to her. His gaze was cautious, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his brown eyes. Ellie smiled softly. "I brought you something," she said in a quiet voice. "It's a toy. I hope you like it." Max's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. He seemed torn, his body stiff as though he wanted to approach but wasn't sure if it was safe. Ellie waited patiently, allowing him to decide for himself. The silence between them felt heavy, but she didn't mind. She was used to waiting. Max needed time. Minutes passed, but Max didn't move. Ellie tried not to let her disappointment show. She picked up the squeaky toy, making it squeak with a gentle squeeze. The noise echoed through the shelter, and Max flinched. His eyes widened slightly, his body stiffening, but instead of running away, he stayed where he was. Ellie's heart sank, but she didn't give up. She tried again, gently tossing the toy a few inches into his cage. Max stood up, watching it carefully. He took a tentative step toward the toy, sniffing it cautiously, his tail tucked but his body not as rigid as before. Ellie held her breath, watching with anticipation. Max gingerly touched the toy with his paw, and Ellie's face lit up in surprise. He had made the first move. Slowly, he picked it up with his mouth and squeezed it again, the squeak filling the quiet room. Max seemed to relax for the first time, his body loosening up as he gently chewed the toy. Ellie's heart swelled with pride. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Max wasn't just a scared, broken dog anymore. He was a dog who was willing to try again, who was starting to trust. She sat there, watching him play with the toy, a huge grin spreading across her face. This was the beginning, Ellie realized. They were just taking the first steps toward a bond, and no matter how long it took, she was willing to be patient. Max deserved to have someone who cared, and Ellie was determined to be the one who showed him that he was worth loving. As she stood up to leave for the day, Ellie looked at Max one last time. This time, he didn't retreat to his corner. He was still playing with the toy, his focus completely on it. Ellie knew that it wasn't just the toy that had changed him. It was the beginning of something much deeper. She whispered to him softly, "I'll be back tomorrow, Max. We'll get through this together." Ellie's visits to the shelter became the highlight of her day. She started to lose track of time as she spent hours with Max, not expecting him to change overnight, but quietly working toward a bond that could heal both of them. Every visit felt like a step forward, no matter how small, and Ellie was learning to be patient. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she had made a promise to Max, and she was determined to keep it. Max's progress, though slow, was undeniable. The first few days had been filled with moments of uncertainty and hesitation. Max was still fearful, often retreating into the back corner of his kennel when she came close. But as the days passed, something began to shift. He didn't growl as much. His tail, while still tucked most of the time, wagged slightly when Ellie spoke softly to him. He seemed to recognize her voice, and that recognition filled her with hope. During her fourth visit, Ellie decided to try something new. She brought a small blanket with her, something that smelled like home, like her, and spread it on the ground outside Max's kennel. She sat down cross-legged on the blanket, hoping it might make her presence feel more inviting, less intimidating. She spoke in a calm, soothing tone, telling Max about her day, about her plans for the weekend, about anything and everything that might help him feel more comfortable around her. Max watched her from his cage, still wary but showing more interest than before. His eyes were locked on her, and though he didn't come closer, Ellie noticed his posture had softened. He wasn't as tense as he had been in the beginning. She smiled to herself, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over her. She didn't need to rush. This would take time. Max needed to know he could trust her, and Ellie was more than willing to give him that time. After a few more minutes of talking to him, Ellie reached out slowly, her hand extended toward the bars of his kennel. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Max remained still, his eyes trained on her hand. She held her breath, wondering if he would retreat again or take another step forward. To her surprise, Max didn't pull away. Instead, he took a small step toward her, his nose inching closer to her outstretched fingers. Ellie's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't pull back. She knew this was a fragile moment. Max was testing the waters. Slowly, cautiously, Max sniffed her hand. He wasn't completely comfortable yet, but he didn't withdraw either. Ellie kept her hand still, letting him approach at his own pace. Time seemed to stretch as Max continued to sniff her fingers, his warm breath brushing against her skin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a soft, hesitant lick to the back of her hand. Ellie's eyes filled with tears, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Max had trusted her enough to make that connection. She smiled through the tears, her heart swelling with pride and joy. She knew this wasn't the end. There was still so much work to be done, but it was the beginning of something real. It was proof that Max wasn't the same dog he had been when she first arrived. He was opening up, little by little. As Ellie sat there, letting Max take his time, she realized something important. This journey was about more than just helping Max. It was about learning patience, understanding, and love. She had given him the time and space he needed to heal, and in return, Max was teaching her that sometimes the smallest steps forward are the most meaningful. "I'll be back tomorrow, Max," she whispered, her voice full of warmth. "We're doing this together, one step at a time." And with that, Ellie stood up, leaving the shelter for the day, knowing that the bond between them was growing stronger with each visit. The weeks that followed were a mixture of small victories and setbacks, but Ellie felt herself growing closer to Max with each visit. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when Max would retreat into his corner, refusing to interact or even acknowledge her presence. But there were also days when his behavior surprised her. Days when he would greet her with a cautious wag of his tail, or take a few tentative steps toward her without flinching. Ellie had learned the delicate balance of patience and persistence. She never pushed Max too hard, always letting him come to her on his own terms. She spoke to him in a soothing voice, telling him about her day, her school projects, and even the books she was reading. She didn't expect him to understand every word, but she believed that the calmness in her voice helped him feel safer. One afternoon, Ellie arrived at the shelter and immediately noticed something different about Max. He was standing at the front of his kennel, his body still and alert, but not with the same fearful tension he had shown in the past. His ears were perked up, and he was watching her, his eyes bright with curiosity. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Slowly, she approached his cage, trying not to make any sudden movements. She reached out and opened the gate to his enclosure, her hand trembling slightly, unsure of how he would react. Max didn't back away. Instead, he stood still, his gaze fixed on her. Ellie crouched down, sitting on the floor just outside his kennel, careful to maintain a safe distance. She spoke softly to him, her voice gentle. "Hi, Max," she whispered. "How are you today?" Max's response was subtle but unmistakable. He took a few steps forward, his body still cautious but not fearful. Ellie held her breath, not daring to make any sudden movements. She knew this was a crucial moment. Max had been so closed off for so long, and the fact that he was now taking the initiative to come closer was a sign that something was changing inside him. As he got closer, Ellie reached her hand through the bars of the kennel, holding it palm up, offering a gesture of peace. Max sniffed her hand, his nose brushing against her fingers. Ellie smiled, but she didn't try to pet him just yet. She wanted to respect his boundaries and give him the time he needed. To her surprise, Max didn't pull away. Instead, he gave her hand a soft lick, his eyes still watching her. Ellie's heart soared. That small, simple act meant so much. Max was starting to trust her. He was beginning to let down the walls he had built around himself. Over the next few days, their relationship continued to evolve. Max became more comfortable with Ellie's presence, his body language more relaxed. He would nuzzle into her hand when she offered it, and he started to follow her movements with his eyes, his ears softening when she spoke to him. Max even began to take treats from her hand, a huge breakthrough after weeks of hesitation. Ellie felt a deep sense of pride as she watched these changes unfold. It was clear that Max was no longer the same dog he had been when they first met. He was learning to trust again, to open up and to believe that not all humans would hurt him. He was beginning to realize that Ellie wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to give up on him. Every day, Ellie could see the light returning to Max's eyes, the fear slowly giving way to curiosity and hope. Max wasn't just becoming more comfortable with her. He was starting to show signs of his true personality, playful, affectionate, and eager to connect. It wasn't a perfect transformation, and there was still work to be done, but Ellie knew they were on the right path. As she sat with him one afternoon, watching him chase a ball she had thrown into the yard, Ellie smiled. "You're doing great, Max," she whispered. "We're almost there." And for the first time, she truly believed it. They were almost there. You said Max's progress was becoming more apparent with each passing week, and Ellie couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The dog who had once been so withdrawn, so fearful of human contact, was slowly transforming into a dog who could trust again. He was still cautious, still had moments of uncertainty, but there were more good days than bad now. One particularly bright Saturday afternoon, Ellie arrived at the shelter with a bag full of his favorite treats and a new leash she had saved up to buy. She had made up her mind. Today was going to be different. She had spent so many days simply sitting with Max, letting him take the lead. But today, she wanted to try something new. She felt that Max was finally ready for a little adventure outside the kennel. It was time for him to see the world beyond the shelter walls. When Ellie approached Max's kennel, she immediately noticed how different he looked today. He was sitting up, tail wagging just slightly, eyes alert and focused on her. The transformation was incredible. He wasn't cowering in the corner anymore. Instead, he was engaged, waiting for her to make the next move. "Hey, buddy," Ellie greeted him softly, crouching down to his level. You ready for something fun today? Max tilted his head as if he understood the question. Ellie took a deep breath, her hand steady, as she slowly opened his kennel door. She gently attached the new leash to his collar, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment. The first time she would take Max outside, just the two of them. To Ellie's surprise, Max didn't hesitate. As soon as the leash was on, he stood up, his body more relaxed than she had ever seen it. He didn't pull away or try to back off. Instead, he followed her, step by step, as they walked together toward the shelter's small outdoor yard. The fresh air hit them as they stepped outside, and Ellie could feel the tension in her chest ease. Max seemed to feel it too. He walked beside her, his steps tentative but calm, sniffing the grass as they passed. Ellie could see that he was taking in everything, the sunlight, the smells, the sounds of the birds chirping above. For the first time, he looked like a dog who was actually enjoying himself, not just surviving. They walked around the yard for a while, with Ellie offering Max treats and encouraging him with kind words. Max wasn't ready to run or play just yet, but he was clearly becoming more comfortable with the idea of being outside, of being in the world with someone who cared for him. As they circled the yard, Ellie could feel Max's energy shifting. He was no longer just a scared dog. He was a dog who was beginning to rediscover the joy of being alive. When they reached a small bench, Ellie sat down, gently patting the space beside her. Max hesitated for a moment, but then, to Ellie's delight, he walked over and sat beside her. His body was still cautious, but his eyes were soft, his breathing steady. Ellie reached out slowly, placing her hand on his back. She didn't expect him to lean into the touch, but he did. For the first time, Max rested his head against her shoulder, a quiet sigh escaping from his chest. Ellie's eyes filled with tears as she stroked his fur. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Max had finally allowed himself to relax, to trust, to accept affection. "You're such a good boy, Max," Ellie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you had it in you." The bond between them had solidified in that moment. Max wasn't just a dog she visited at the shelter anymore. He was her companion, her friend, and she was his. As they sat there together, Ellie realized that their journey wasn't just about Max learning to trust her. It was about her learning to trust herself too. She had stuck by him, day after day, never giving up on him even when the progress seemed slow. And now, Max was showing her that love, patience, and belief could create real change. Max lifted his head from her shoulder and looked at her with those deep, soulful eyes. It was as if he was thanking her, telling her he was ready for whatever came next. Ellie smiled softly. "I'm not going anywhere, Max. We're in this together." As the weeks went by, Ellie and Max became inseparable. What had started as a simple bond of trust had blossomed into something deeper, something unspoken but understood between them. Ellie was no longer just a visitor at the shelter. She was Max's person, and Max was her dog. She had made a promise to him, and she had kept it. Max was no longer the shy, frightened dog that had been labeled unadoptable by the shelter. He had transformed, not only physically but emotionally as well. Ellie continued to visit Max every day after school, rain or shine, no matter how busy or tired she felt. It wasn't just for Max anymore. She needed him too. He had become her constant, her source of joy and peace. They had a rhythm now, a routine that was comforting for both of them. Ellie would bring him a new toy, sometimes a bone, and sometimes just a new treat for him to try. But it wasn't just the material things that mattered. It was the time they spent together, the way Max's eyes would light up when he saw her, the way he would lean into her touch, his tail wagging gently. One particularly quiet afternoon, Ellie arrived at the shelter to find the usual bustle of activity replaced by an unusual stillness. She immediately felt a sense of urgency in her chest as she approached the kennel area, wondering why the shelter seemed so quiet. When she reached Max's kennel, her heart skipped a beat. There was a new sign on his cage, one that wasn't there the day before. "Available for adoption." Ellie stood frozen for a moment, the words blurring before her eyes. Max was no longer just a shelter dog. He was up for adoption. The thought of someone else taking him home filled her with a mixture of dread and sadness. She had worked so hard to build this connection with him, and now he was being offered to strangers. Ellie couldn't let him go, not after everything they had been through together. Max, sensing her distress, trotted over to the bars of his kennel, his tail wagging softly as he looked up at her. He was different now. There was a calmness about him, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. It was as if he knew the significance of this moment. He was ready to leave the shelter, but was Ellie ready to let him go? Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out through the bars to touch his face. "You've come so far, Max," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You've come so far." A soft bark escaped Max, as if to reassure her that he was okay. Ellie smiled through her tears, realizing something important. It wasn't just about saving Max anymore. It was about giving him the chance to have a real life, outside the shelter, surrounded by love. If someone else came for him, she would have to let him go, even though it hurt. But Ellie wasn't ready to give up just yet. The thought of him being adopted by someone else made her heart ache. She had a decision to make, one that would change both of their lives forever. "Max," Ellie whispered, wiping away her tears. "You're ready, but so am I. Let's take this step together." And with that, Ellie took a deep breath, determined to do whatever it took to give Max the future he deserved. The decision had been made. Ellie couldn't bear the thought of Max being taken away by someone else. She knew she had to make a choice, not just for Max, but for herself. She had fallen in love with him, completely and undeniably. The bond they had formed over the past few months was too strong to break. It wasn't just about saving him anymore. It was about giving him a home, a family, and a future. A future that she was determined to be a part of. The following day, Ellie returned to the shelter, this time with her parents in tow. She had talked to them the night before, her voice filled with both excitement and anxiety, and had explained everything: how far Max had come, how much he meant to her, and how she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. They had listened patiently, and after some discussion, her parents had agreed to take the next step. Max was about to become a permanent part of their family. Ellie walked into the shelter, holding her parents' hands tightly, her heart racing in her chest. She had never been more nervous in her life. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was determined to make sure Max would never have to face the shelter again. They reached Max's kennel, and Ellie could already see him sitting near the bars, his tail wagging softly at the sight of her. His eyes were bright, and as soon as he saw her, he stood up, ears perked, and let out a soft bark. Ellie's parents smiled at him, clearly seeing the same thing Ellie had seen in the past few weeks, the loving, loyal dog that had been waiting for a chance to thrive. Ellie knelt down beside the kennel, holding out her hand. Max approached cautiously, sniffing her fingers before gently licking her hand, just as he had done many times before. "That's my boy," Ellie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're coming home with us." Her parents spoke to the shelter staff, completing the necessary paperwork, and before long, Ellie was leading Max out of his kennel and into the car. Max walked beside her confidently, no longer the scared, anxious dog he had once been. The trip home was filled with excitement, though Ellie tried to stay calm for Max's sake. She knew this was a big change for him, moving into a new home, leaving the only place he had ever known, but she was certain he would adjust. He had already come so far. When they arrived at their house, Ellie opened the door to the backyard, letting Max step out first. He hesitated for a moment, looking around at the new surroundings, but then, as if reassured by the familiarity of Ellie's presence, Max took his first steps into his new home. He walked around the yard, sniffing the grass, exploring every corner, and then stopped to look up at Ellie, his eyes filled with wonder. Ellie knelt down beside him, scratching behind his ears. "Welcome home, Max," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth and love. "This is your home now. You're safe, and you'll always have a place here with us." Max turned to her, and for a moment, everything felt still. It was as if he understood. His tail wagged gently, and he leaned into Ellie's side, resting his head on her lap. Ellie's heart swelled with happiness. This was more than she could have ever imagined. She had saved Max, but in the process, Max had saved her too. He had shown her the power of patience, the importance of trust, and the beauty of unconditional love. Mac's journey wasn't over, but it was only just beginning. Together, they would face the future, knowing that they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed. A new chapter had started, one full of endless possibilities, and Ellie knew that with Max by her side, their bond would only grow stronger with time. Together forever, Max, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And Max, as if understanding every word, gave a soft, contented sigh.